Hello and welcome to this video tutorial. In this video I will show you the capabilities of youTOUCH for cross-platform multi-touch publishing. youTOUCH is the first integrated solution to provide the ability for multi-touch solutions on Windows 7, iOS, Android and TUIO based systems. Ensure that you're using the Unity 3 version, as youTOUCH uses Unity's new input API. Our package is running in the Indie and Pro version of Unity. Okay, we start with an empty scene and import the youTOUCH Unity package. When you import youTOUCH and have selected the Windows platform in your build settings, you will get some compiler warnings that the Windows 7 namespace or type could not be found. So first, we have to install the required DLLs with our installer to avoid further compiler warnings. Go to the youTOUCH folder inside the plugins folder, where the youTOUCH.WM-Touch setup installer is located. Just double-click on it and click through the installation process. The installer does two things. First, it installs our Windows 7 Multitouch DLL, that is the bridge between Windows and Unity, and copies required Microsoft Net DLLs from your Windows system into the plugins folder of your Unity project. We can't provide these DLLs right out of the box with this package because of license issues with the Microsoft Net framework. After the installation is complete, you should see two new folders inside the input WM-Touch folder named DLL and dll.microsoft.net. If there's any problem at this step, you will have to check your Windows 7 installation if the Net Framework 3 is properly installed. If you develop on an Apple machine but want to publish for Windows, you can take the DLL folders and copy them to the same folder in your Unity project on that machine. You have to run the installer when you try to compile for the Windows platform, even if you just want to use the TUIO feature. After successfully running the installer, the compiler warnings will disappear. Now, before we start developing, you should check your player settings at the beginning to avoid some possible confusion in later steps. When you are in the player settings, go to the Other settings and set the API compatibility level to Net 2. This is one of the main pitfalls when developing with youTOUCH and the WM-Touch feature. Then we go to the Resolution and Presentation tab and check the Run as Background option. This is important if you work with the TUIO feature and use the TUIO simulator from TUIO.org for testing. To make this setup in the future more easy, just go to the youTOUCH menu item that appears after you install the youTOUCH package and select the Setup Player Settings item. This will make all these changes in one step. If you can't see the new menu item at the top of the editor window named youTOUCH, you should click once on the menu bar and it will appear. Now we are ready to start developing. The first thing we have to do is to provide an instance of the Input Manager script to our scene. You could use one of the prefabs that are already configured, or create an empty game object and add the required components by hand. You only need one instance of the Input Manager in your project, even if it consists of several scenes. If once an instance is created, the Input Manager will not be destroyed when changing the scene. So you should place your Input Manager in your first scene and youTOUCH will work in all other scenes. I generate a new empty game object and add the Input Manager component by hand. If you look at the Input Manager's inspector, you see a couple of options. Convert Mouse to Touch lets you generate touches with the mouse. This is useful when you work in the editor to test touching in an easy way. Some touch hardware simulates the first touch also as mouse events. In this case, it's better to turn off this option when you run your application in a production environment. iPhone Touch IDs is an option to simulate the way the iPhone assigns the touch IDs to each touch point. This is different to other touch hardware. Most TOUCH trackers or infrared frames like the PQ Labs frames, for example, don't start at null with the ID and just count up the IDs with a global ID counter. On the iPhone, your first finger gets always the null as ID, the second the 1, and so on. For youTOUCH itself, this option has no real meaning, but for other packages like finger gestures, it is very important that you use the iPhone ID style. The main rendering camera is the camera that the input manager uses to map the normalized input coordinates from your input provider to screen coordinates. If you leave this option empty, the first active camera is used at runtime, so most of the time you could leave this option empty. In a later tutorial, I explain a multi-camera setup where this option becomes a more important meaning. The layers checked is the layer mask for raycasting in your scene for the main rendering camera. Most of the time you could leave this to everything. Like the main rendering camera option, this setting becomes more meaning in multi-camera setups. The touch data source is the option where you change your input provider. At this time, you could choose between TOUCH and WM-Touch. If you want to publish for the iPhone, you don't have to set anything. At the moment you switch the platform in the build settings to a mobile device, this option just disappears. For our first test, we switched to WM-Touch to see how we could test and publish our project for Windows 7 multi-touch systems. I switched to one of the pre-configured test scenes that comes with youTOUCH, as I will explain how to set up interactive objects in another tutorial. When you run your scene in the editor, you will get a message in the console that the WM-Touch feature is not working in the editor. You can still use the mouse for input test, but you have to build and run your application to test the WM-Touch feature. If you need to test an application in the editor with multiple touches, you could switch to the TOUCH data source and use the TOUCH simulator. Now we build and run this scene to test our application. If you have a multi-touch display attached to your computer, you now could work with the multi-touch feature of Windows 7 in Unity. If you want to use a TOUCH-enabled device, just change the data source to TOUCH. All the multi-touch features are now working even in the editor. For a quick test, we start the application in the editor and run a TOUCH simulator. In a special TOUCH tutorial, I will explain the setup for displaying track markers. After the first jump for joy, you will think, okay, but I want an iPad version of my application. I transferred my project to my Mac to publish for the iOS platform. Just change the build settings platform to iOS. If you have installed the Windows 7 DLLs, with the installer we run into a problem when we publish now. Unity tries to include the DLLs into the project, but this will cause some compilation errors. So first, we have to remove all DLLs from our assets folder. If we later want to publish for Windows again, we have to add all DLLs again to our plugins folder. To simplify this process, just go to the youTOUCH menu and select the Setup for iPhone item. This will do all necessary steps automatically for you if you want to switch your build target platform. All DLL are removed from the plugins folder and stored in the DLL storage folder outside the assets folder for later re-import. The build target platform changed automatically to iOS. We strongly recommend this way and advise against to switch the build target platform by hand to avoid trouble with missing DLL or other compilation troubles. If you got any problems, you could select the Reset Installation menu item. This will remove the installed DLL folders and the DLL storage folder from your project. You have to run the installer again to install the DLL. After the DLL are removed, the compilation process will work and you can publish without any changes for your mobile devices. If you want to publish for Windows again, just select the Setup for Windows menu item and all the DLL files are added once again. The process for Android is the same as for iOS. You see, we try to minimize the configuration efforts to provide the easiest workflow for cross-platform multi-touch publishing in a transparent way. In the youTOUCH GUI Basics tutorial, I will show you that youTOUCH can be used not only as a GUI framework, but also can act as a transparent input layer for other Unity packages like EasyGUI or finger gestures. Thanks for watching this video.